says it's snowing in Brownsville, Texas. That's a reader by the name of Andy. And he said that's twice now so far this winter. And that's a rare event. Happening twice is very extraordinary. And then I got another email from somebody this afternoon that it was 26 degrees and snowing in Houston. My word. Yeah, it's not your imagination. There's stuff going on. It would be interesting to see how many of your listeners tonight are seeing snow tonight. Well, tonight it's going to be doing. I mean, today I guess this winter weather has shut down the interstates in Louisiana and closed roads in Kentucky, and it closed the runways, the airport runways in Texas, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, and we're talking far down in the south, and they're having ice-coated bridges in Mississippi and in Alabama, and they're calling for 2 inches of snow in Alabama. So yeah, it plays into what I've been saying. You know, I've been saying for 20 years that we're headed into an ice age, and so far I have not had to change my story. They don't call it a cold age; they call it an ice age. So during the last ice age, most of Canada was covered by 1 to 2 miles of ice, go straight up. I mean, but we're talking a lot of ice. Seattle was covered by 3/4 of a mile of ice. And yet, if you went 150 miles south of Seattle, it was only about 7 degrees colder than it is right now. So what we're talking about is, yes, we're talking about more snow, which ends up accumulating. If it gets deep enough, it becomes ice. But south of the ice sheets, life goes on. It may be a little cooler, but I think during the last ice age, Florida was only like 3 degrees colder than it is right now. The equatorial rainforest belt, it stayed almost the same. So not everybody has to worry. To me, the biggest problem will be food. There's a cycle to ice ages. It shows up in the geologic record going back for millions, if not billions of years. And there's no reason to think that cycle isn't going to repeat. Actually, there's several little cycles. There's one called the solar retrograde cycle, where the sun has its own little tiny orbit, and it goes into a retrograde motion about every 180 years, and the Earth gets cooler. Then there's the little ice age cycle. That is about every 360 years, when the sunspots slow down or almost stop, and so that's another cycle. Then there's one called the Milankovitch cycle, which we've known about since at least the 1970s, but that ice ages return approximately every 11,500 years based on something called precession of the equinoxes. And then there's a huge cycle. It's called orbital stretch. But our orbit, the Earth's orbit around the sun, is not a perfect circle. It's slightly elliptical. And it doesn't remain elliptical. It goes from being close to a circle to an elliptical and back to close to circle. That takes about 105,000 years. And guess what? We have an ice age about every 105,000 years. The problem that I see today is that every single one of those cycles is now due to hit. And I don't see anything that humans can do to stop it. I don't think we're causing it, and I don't think we can stop it. I used to say I thought global warming was a hoax. I'm beginning more and more to think it's a fraud. The things that we hear about global warming. Well, one of the reasons I say that, is that the world was getting cooler in the 1970s, and then it started to warm up. But then we had this pause, that began in about 1997, where the warming stopped. So the way we used to keep track of that is, as near as I can tell, is that we kept track of temperatures on land. Well, now we're including the ocean temperatures in that, which we didn't used to do. And ocean temperatures, I agree, ocean temperatures have been going up, but I don't think it's caused by humans. I think it's caused by underwater volcanic activity. So So, if you take the oceans out of the equation, temperatures on land have been going down, and land is pretty much where we live. So that's the one that I just don't think we're getting the true figure. 11,500 years ago, we entered into a short ice age called the Younger Dryas, when something like 40% of the world's larger mammals went extinct. We're talking about the mammals that weighed over 100 pounds. So the short-faced bear went extinct, the mammoth went extinct, the mastodon went extinct, the saber-toothed tiger, and the glyptodon. There's so many different animals that went extinct. So that was about 11,500 years ago. Then about 23,000 years ago, we entered into an ice age, and again, that was an extinction. I don't think of the names. The European forest elephant, I think, went extinct. I don't remember the others. Then 33,000 years ago, we went into an ice age, and that's when the studies I've read. That's when the Neanderthals went extinct. So, yeah, that cycle just shows up in the record. We used to think the ice ages began very slowly, but in 1997 there was a project called GRIP, Greenland Ice Core Project, where they drilled deep cores into the ice in central Greenland. They went down as much as 2 miles deep and pulled the cores up so that they could look at ice that had formed as much as 250,000 years ago. And they determined that every ice age in the last 250,000 years, every single ice age began in less than 20 years. And by beginning in less than 20 years, it went from temperatures and climate as warm as today into full-fledged glacial severity in less than 20 years. So, yeah, it can happen very, very. And now, again, though, I'm not saying we're going to be covered with ice. It's not like these giant ice sheets come grinding out of the north. It's called a snow blitz, and we just get heavier and heavier snows. I think we're due. When I look at the various cycles, and of course when I look at the sunspot cycle, the little ice age cycle, right now, sunspots, we're now in something like the Dalton minimum of 180 years ago, where sunspots are the lowest they have been in more than 100 years. And that in the past has correlated with these little ice ages. If that keeps going, then we're on our way right now. I just looked today on the website for where they keep track of the Greenland ice sheet. And the Greenland ice sheet, as of today, it has a greater mass balance than is the median. So because I hear all this stuff about, the melting ice in the Arctic is what's having us have all these big snowstorms down here, but that's not true, because the Greenland, as of today, the Greenland ice sheet the mass balance is bigger than normal. As of today, the Antarctic ice sheet is still growing. I mean, we do read articles in the paper and on the internet about glaciers on the West Antarctic Peninsula that are melting, and yes, that peninsula sticks out into the warmer ocean, so the glaciers there have been melting. A lot of that is also coming from volcanoes beneath the ice, but the primary part, the huge part of Antarctica, the ice is still growing thicker. So, and then the Himalayas, that's a big one, is that a few years ago we were told that all the ice was going to be gone in the Himalayas by 2035. Well, it turns out that is not true. The glaciers in the Himalayas are actually growing. K2 is growing, Namba Parbat, Mount Everest. The glaciers are growing in a big part of the Himalayas. Glaciers are growing right here in the United States. And that's one I'll bet that a lot of your listeners aren't even aware of. But Mount St. Helens, that erupted when? 1980, 1981, I forget which. But before Mount St. Helens erupted, it was covered with a lot of glacial areas. And during that eruption, all of that ice melted almost instantaneously, and it rushed down the Toutle River along with bulldozers and rocks and whatever else. So the glacier was gone. Well, a new glacier has reformed inside of the crater, and the glacier on Mount St. Helens is now bigger than it was before the eruption. That's, you don't hear about that, but that is a fact. Glaciers are other great glaciers are growing in Washington State. Glaciers on Mount Baker, according to geologist Don Easterbrook, he's been measuring them, and they are growing. So there's glaciers, quite a few glaciers that are growing. But just looking at the Antarctic glacier and the glacier in Greenland, the Antarctic ice sheet and the Greenland ice sheet, those two ice sheets alone are like 90% of the world's glaciers. So when you look at it that way, at least 90% of the world's glaciers are growing, but we're being told that they're melting. So we're not hearing the full truth. Some people say a pole shift is a magnetic reversal, but other people say a pole shift is where the Earth actually tips upside down. So in that respect, very different, because during a magnetic reversal, the Earth does not tip upside down. All that happens is that the magnetic North Pole moves to the South Pole. Now, because our magnetic field is pointed toward the Arctic for so long, we like to think that's normal, but actually the Earth's magnetic field has been reversed for about half of history. And that's another thing, of course, that I go back to with the ice ages, is that I see that ice ages have begun or ended in conjunction with magnetic reversals. There was a magnetic reversal almost exactly 11,500 years. It depends on the measurements. About anywhere from 11,500 years ago to 12,300 years ago, there was a magnetic reversal called the Gothenburg magnetic reversal. Now, if you look up magnetic reversals, they're going to tell you that the last magnetic reversal was 780,000 years ago. But that is because in many cases they don't include what are called magnetic excursions. And a magnetic excursion is a time when our magnetic field sometimes moves all the way south and then moves back. Sometimes it moves partway south and fluctuates and then moves back. So these magnetic excursions, which often may last as little as 500 years, they often don't show up in the record. But we do know that there was the Gothenburg magnetic excursion about 11,500 years ago, which correlated with the mammoth extinction. We know there was the Lake Mungo magnetic reversal about 23,000 ago. That correlates. There was another one 33,000 years ago. So a lot of these magnetic reversals absolutely correlate with ice ages. And when you say we're going through one right now, what has happened in the past is as our magnetic field strength goes down and goes down and goes down, and when it reaches a certain point, about 15% of normal, then it can reverse very quickly. Well, when the book first came out, when Not by Fire but by Ice first came out, our magnetic field strength was declining at the rate of 5% per 100 years. Well, now there was a new study that came out just a couple of years ago. Now they say that our magnetic field strength is declining at 5% per decade, not per 100 years. So it has speeded up by 10 times. Nobody knows what that means. I don't either, but I'm thinking it could mean that we're closer to a reversal than we realize. What I tie it into is precession of the equinoxes. And without getting too esoteric, let me see if I can explain it, is that if you could put a stick, the Earth rotates, And if you could put a stick through our axis of rotation, it right now would point toward the star Polaris, the North Star. But that axis of rotation slowly turns, so that 11,500 years from now, that axis of rotation is going to be pointing toward a different star, toward the star Vega. And then 11,500 years from then, it's going to be back pointing toward the star Polaris again. I think somehow, and I do not know the mechanism, but I think somehow that the magnetic reversal is related to that precession of the equinoxes, to that turning of our axis of rotation. It goes so slowly that we don't see it, we don't feel it, but it's happening. If you live in Canada, you better worry about it, I would say, because during the last ice age, most of Canada was covered by 1 to 2 miles of ice, 1 to 2 miles straight up. Seattle was covered by about 3/4 of a mile of ice straight up. Now, at the same time, amazingly, most of Alaska was not covered with ice during the last ice age. That is an amazing thing. But apparently the Pacific Ocean moderated it enough that most of Alaska was okay. It'll be safe during an ice age, I think. But at the same time, all of this ice that's accumulating in the north and far south, the water to create that ice had to come from somewhere. So what happened during the last ice age is that sea levels were 400 feet lower than they are today. Now, the Bering Strait is only about 270 feet deep. So that means that the Bering Strait was actually above water. And it actually created a land bridge, a huge, huge land bridge, almost as wide as Alaska is itself. But it created this huge land bridge, and our ancestors could have walked here. They didn't have to come with a boat. They could have walked across that land bridge. So, one of the things I just discovered, Indonesia, Sumatra and that area of Indonesia during the last ice age was actually connected to the mainland, and there was a huge amount of land that was above water. That's probably the size of a continent. And some people think that's probably where Atlantis would have been located, because it was above water, and then as the ice sheets melted, then it slowly started up again. They're talking, I see all this talk about rising sea levels. Well, shoot, sea levels have been rising for 11,500 years. There's nothing new going on about that. Science tells you if you look far enough, but it's there. Part of it is, I think part of it is the purse strings. If somebody starts going against the politically correct idea of global warming, they're going to lose their job. The state climatologist of Oregon lost his job because he disagreed with the global warming scenario. The state climatologist of Virginia lost his job because he disagreed with the global warming scenario. The state climatologist of Delaware lost his job for the same reason. Now, if you're a young scientist just starting out and you've got a wife and kids and you're paying, or if you're a woman scientist, whichever, but you're paying rent and you're paying for your household and you're paying your car payments, and if you see your boss get fired, you're going to say, maybe I better just toe the line a little bit here. I think that's part of it. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think they just learn what they better not say. I do write about in Not by Fire but by Ice, but I have one chapter called I think it's Crazy Snakes and Twirling Cockroaches or something like that. I don't remember. Not necessarily during a reversal, but just during an earthquake when the magnetic field changes, because the magnetic field does often change during an earthquake. But catfish will start jumping out of the water, and snakes. I told about this one in this one earthquake in China where it was like February. It was below zero, and yet snakes started crawling out of the ground, and then they froze to death. rather than being caught and being ground into snake burger by the land. So, but yeah, birds during a race, some homing pigeons, when the magnetic field changes a little bit, why homing pigeons get lost. And of course, at the airports, my understanding is that they have signs along the runways that tell pilots where to go, where magnetic north is, and many airports have had to start changing their signs because magnetic north is moving. Now, that's something that happens all the time. But it is moving. When lava comes out of the earth, it's so hot that it does not have a magnetic inclination. But when it through what's called the Curie temperature, then it takes on the magnetic field of the day. So scientists can go to I think this is fascinating. I haven't done it, but I'd love to. But scientists can go to a lava field, and they can drill a hole into the lava, and then put their compass down inside that hole, and they can tell which way was north at the time that volcano erupted. It's really fascinating. Sea levels declined in 2011. Sea levels declined in 2012. And sea levels declined last year. Sea levels have been rising for 11,500 years, and they've been rising about the thickness of a dime and a nickel put together. Not the diameter, just the thickness. That's how much they've been rising, and that's how much I guess that we're supposed to be petrified about. But that's been going on, as I said, for thousands of years. But actually, in 2012. They went down. In 2011, they went down, and last year, sea levels went down. Not much, but they... And, of course, I think that's because of the huge snowstorms. Last year, California had their huge snowstorms, their